Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme this week, OPEC oil alliance at an impasse. Talks on production stall following clashes between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Building Sharjah. I'll be speaking to Sultan Al Qassemi about his latest book, which is the most in-depth look at any city in the region. Plus, Mick Jagger and Marilyn Monroe in colours bright and bold. Andy Warhol's works of art are in a rare display in Tehran. Thank you for being with us. We start with an unusual public confrontation between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which has left oil markets in uncertainty. There are concerns that if an agreement cannot be reached, the OPEC alliance could break apart. Claire Rush has the story.
At an impasse, the OPEC Plus group called off Monday's talks, adding in a statement that the date of the next meeting will be decided in due course. The breakdown stems from a row over crude output levels, pitting Saudi Arabia against the United Arab Emirates. The OPEC Plus group is backing a plan to gradually raise oil production to prevent high prices from derailing the global economy's fragile recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The current proposal is to increase output by 400,000 barrels per day each month until the end of the year. But the UAE supports only a short-term boost, something Saudi Arabia says will destabilize the energy market.
جهدا كبيرا بذل في خلال 14 شهر الماضية حقق إنجازات خيالية يعيب علينا أن لا نحافظ عليها وشيء من التنازل وشيء من العقلانية والمخلص الحقيقي لنا.
The sticking point between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi is over baseline production levels. That's the amount which determines how much each member is allowed to pump. The UAE wants to increase its current baseline of 3.17 million barrels per day to 3.8 million, an increase Saudi Arabia is not prepared to back. Another point of disagreement, the date at which production should come back to pre-pandemic levels. Fixed for April 2022, some members want to extend the deadline on capping output to December 2022, a move opposed by Abu Dhabi. A failure to reach a deal could cause crude oil prices to surge. Already, prices have increased more than 45% since the start of the year as countries slowly reopen and restart their economies.
On this week's Middle East Matters, I have the pleasure of hosting Sultan Al Qassemi, who's not just a friend of the show, but also the inspiration behind some of our guests. Sultan joins me in the studio to talk about his latest book, Building Sharjah, which is the most extensive study of any city in the United Arab Emirates and quite possibly the entire region. Sultan, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
This was no easy feat. 5 years of research, 600 images, 550 of them never seen before, 17 essays. What inspired you?
I want to say first that this was a result of a collaborative effort. So my co-editor, Dr. Todd Rees, our lead researcher, Reem Khorshid, the book designer, Farah Fayyad, all of us and many others played a role in bringing this book together. So even though it's 5 years, it's actually longer than that if you think about all the effort that went into it. What inspired us is the importance of documenting our history in the region. The fact is that a lot of people who came to the United Arab Emirates were immigrants who lived for a few years and then packed up, went back home or moved to another country. And so they take their archive, their documents, their photographs with them and say, we miss out on that. And so documenting a city, the rise of a city and the formation of these urban environment and communities was the driving force behind this book.
And Sultan, you just spoke about documenting history. When you're doing that and when you're searching for archival images, they can pop up in the strangest of places. I'm talking about Baghdad.
That's right. In fact, one of the biggest archives of Sharjah didn't even exist in the United Arab Emirates. It existed in Baghdad, in Iraq. And the reason we found it was that some mere coincidence, I ran into the great nephew of this photographer who lived in the UAE in the 70s, and this archive was abandoned completely. And the family were very generous and gave us access to this archive. It was beautifully presented and photographed. And And this individual, Professor Dr. Na'man Al-Jalili, was working for the UN Development Office, I think, or Development Program. And he took beautiful photos of Sharjah, a city that hasn't been photographed by professionals. Most of the photographs we have were by regular people.
Sultan, I have this image of this abandoned house and you guys taking the archive from it. And of course, this book isn't just about mapping out buildings and streets. There's a really human touch, a very personal one. Your mother features in it, who's immensely inspiring.
That's right. Well, I feel kind of conflicted that I wrote about my mom, but the truth is that my mom was one of the two first teachers in the country. So my mom, Naima bint Majid Al Qassemi, and then my auntie Amina Al Hajri, they were the first teachers, not just women, but women or from any gender, the first teachers in the country. And so they played an important role. Building Sharjah is not just building the structures, but also building the human being. And this also reflects the importance, role that women were playing. And the truth is, there were just too many men in that book. We needed to have...
It's an industry that happens to be dominated by men, so it makes sense.
That's correct.
Now, speaking about this human touch, I want to talk about Little Palestine, because that really beautifully and importantly captures this community that really wanted to replicate the homes they left behind in Sharjah.
That's correct. So Sharjah was one of the first cities in the region, if not the first city in the United Arab Emirates, even before the formation of the country, to allow Palestinians and other people from the region to own not just their homes, but the plot itself, the land itself. And so many Palestinians moved to Sharjah in the 1960s and even the 50s, where they started building and designing their homes. They took inspiration from the homes they left behind. And for Palestinians, the issue of permanence is paramount. It's important for them to own the property. And when it came to designing their house, they wanted something that reflects their recent history, maybe the houses that they left behind, maybe the houses they were driven out from.
Sultan, I'm going to say something you usually cringe when I say this, but it's true. You're someone who, over the years, has really strived to give a platform to important voices, unheard voices in the region. And many of them happen to be linked to the words of arts and culture. And this is captured beautifully in your book, because there's a chapter that talks about performing arts alongside these buildings.
That's right. So when these structures came up in the 1970s and 80s, a lot of people find them to be quirky, strange, and they decided to do something about it. And some artists, there was a collective that went and decided to create, an art performance, an art installation in front of this new structure, which is a very famous, very popular building, souk in Sharjah. And they in fact wanted to venture even further than that. They wanted to do a performance at a cemetery. And so these were a very avant-garde group of artists, and we wanted to capture the modernity in that field, the issue, the way that they wanted to interact with these new buildings that were coming up, that were alien to everybody.
You're speaking of modernity. Something that really stood out to me beyond the chapter on your mom was Sharjah, the disco capital.
That's true. That's true. Sharjah, between the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of hotels come up, and a lot of hotels had a lot of services associated with them, restaurants, cafes, but also entertainment venues at night. And Sharjah had a lot of those in the 1970s and 80s, and this actually ended towards the mid-1980s for a number of reasons. But definitely a big part of the history of Sharjah was the entertainment industry.
Sultan, briefly, if you can, do you hope that a book like this, Building Sharjah, can inspire other people to do the same, to document their cities?
I would hope so, because unfortunately our cities are under attack, not the way that people think of, but the fact is that they're changing so fast. The fact is the regulation isn't protecting our modern buildings. The fact is a lot of people are leaving. The fact is that the speed of development is so high that we can't keep up, and we need to make sure that our modern history is protected. And the reality is that people, when you don't protect modern history, it makes it easier for people to erase modern history. People can start manipulating the recent past. And the best way to protect it is to preserve it, highlight it, document it, archive it, and share it with the world.
So that's a lovely message to leave this program on. Sultan Qassemi, thank you so much. The man behind this extraordinary book, Building Sharjah. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Now we finish in the Iranian capital this week, where several of American artist Andy Warhol's works have been put on display for the first time ever. Emerald Maxwell takes us around the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art.
Mick Jagger, Marilyn Monroe, Jackie Kennedy,
made icons of pop art by Andy Warhol. They're now under the spotlight in Tehran. The leading American pop artist is an unlikely subject for a cultural event in the Iranian capital, and it's currently the hottest ticket in town.
When I heard about a new exhibition on Warhol, I thought it was happening abroad. But no, it's happening at home. It's a real surprise. I didn't know we had any works by Warhol.
I'd seen the famous portraits of Marilyn Monroe on Instagram, but I didn't know who Andy Warhol was. So I was interested to find out.
Among the 7 series exhibited, the famous Campbell's soup cans, or how a simple American consumer object can become a work of art the world over. The visitors don't all know it, but they're among a lucky few.
This silk print series of Campbell's soups was bought in the 60s, like all the others we own. But this symbolic Warhol work has never been exhibited. It has never come out of our storeroom.
Never before exhibited paintings that had been gathering dust in the storeroom of Tehran's Museum of Contemporary Art, which houses some 3,500 masterpieces estimated to be worth about 3 billion euros, sought after by collectioners around the world. It was the Empress Faradiba who began this unique collection. Like her husband, the Shah of Iran, she was an art lover and even posed for Warhol in 1976. That was before the Islamic Revolution, before the rupture between Iran and the West, before works judged subversive were hidden. Warhol's pieces are being shown in a political climate which is still charged. For this artist, any opportunity for Iran and the West to get to know each other better shouldn't be missed, though it should go both ways.
It's much older now. People are, as I said, much more up-to-date in Iran than about the West and West about Iran.
These Warhols are being jealously guarded and won't leave Iran. In the current mistrustful climate, the museum isn't lending out its work.
Well, that's it from us this week. Thank you so much for watching Middle East Matters.